The Marshal Plan: How America Rebuilt Europe. Imagine winning the most destructive war in human history, and then deciding the real fight was just beginning. In 1947, the United States stunned the world. It would send billions of dollars across the Atlantic to rebuild a continent that had nearly destroyed itself. No conquered territory, no imposed rule, no war reparations demanded in return. Only capital. To some, it looked like generosity. To others, it looked like strategy. Because the country that controlled Europe's recovery would influence Europe's allegiance. And the country that influenced Europe would command the balance of power for decades. Part 1. A continent running on empty. By 1945, the guns were silent, but Europe was barely standing. Industrial production had plunged, rail networks were twisted wreckage, energy supplies were dangerously low. Cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Cologne were landscapes of concrete and ash. But physical destruction was only part of the crisis. Financial systems were exhausted, national currencies were unstable, government debt was suffocating. In some regions, bread lines stretched for blocks. Inflation devoured life savings. Factories lacked raw materials. Farm output couldn't meet demand. This wasn't temporary hardship, it was structural collapse. And when economies fracture, political systems begin to crack with them. Part 2. The ideological pressure cooker. As hardship deepened, political tensions intensified. In France and Italy, communist parties surged in popularity. Workers demanded change. Strikes paralyzed key industries. Public faith in traditional leadership weakened. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union tightened its grip across Eastern Europe. Washington's policymakers understood the stakes. Economic desperation is fertile ground for ideological shifts. If Western Europe spiraled further, the political map of the continent could tilt toward Moscow. The Cold War had not yet been formally declared, but its outlines were unmistakable. That is when Secretary of State George Marshall stepped forward. At Harvard University, he unveiled a proposal bold enough to alter history. The United States would fund Europe's recovery comprehensively, deliberately, and at scale. Part 3. Rebuilding at Scale. The initiative became known as the Marshall Plan. From 1948 to 1952, over $13 billion crossed the Atlantic. But this was not unrestricted aid. European governments were required to coordinate policy. They needed to modernize industries. They needed to stabilize monetary systems and expand output. Infrastructure projects restarted, ports reopened, manufacturing lines reactivated. The West Germany, France, and Netherlands experienced rapid industrial expansion. Agricultural production improved, trade channels strengthened, investor confidence gradually returned. Within 4 years, Western Europe was no longer teetering, it was stabilizing and then growing. Moscow rejected participation and prohibited Eastern Bloc nations from joining. From that point forward, Europe would be split not just by ideology, but by economic alignment. Part 4. Influence without occupation. Publicly, the United States framed the program as assistance. Strategically, it created interdependence. A significant share of the funds financed purchases of American machinery, raw materials, and agricultural goods. American exports climbed. Domestic production remained strong. The dollar gained further prominence in global finance. But the deeper impact went beyond trade. Western Europe's recovery became connected to American economic networks. Cooperation among European nations increased, eventually contributing to institutions such as the European Coal and Steel Community, a precursor to today's European Union. This was influence secured not through occupation, but through integration, and integration proved more durable than force. Part 5. The Real Lesson. The Marshall Plan illustrates a defining principle of modern geopolitics. Power does not end when the fighting stops. It evolves. Reconstruction determines alliances. Economic stability shapes political identity. Financial systems create spheres of influence. By stepping into Europe's moment of vulnerability, the United States did more than stabilize economies. It structured a network of trade, currency, cooperation, and shared growth. The nation that funds recovery often helps design the rules that follow. The Marshall Plan was not an act of impulse, it was calculated statecraft. And in rebuilding Europe, the United States positioned itself at the core of the post-war international order, where economic leverage became the foundation of lasting global influence.